We often talk about sewing-related books on this podcast, but this episode is a first. We're discussing a novel about sewing machines. Amazing guest interviewer Kat Camfield is back again, and she's talking to author Natalie Fergie about Natalie's incredible historical novel, The Sewing Machine. Based on real historical events that took place at the Singer Sewing Machine Factory in Scotland, the novel follows two families, one belonging to a factory worker who goes on strike, and the other belonging to the owner of one of the sewing machines that striker helped make. If you're interested in sewing as a lens through which to look at social history, then you're going to find this conversation fascinating. Natalie and Kat also geek out over vintage sewing machines and their sizable collections, so stick around a few minutes for that. Welcome to Check Your Thread, the podcast that will help you sew more sustainably. My name's Zoe and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 17 years and I'm the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge, Me Made May. But, like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate and ecological crises, and I'm looking at the way that my lifestyle contributes to them. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me in this journey. Hi, gorgeous listener. How are you doing? Happy November. Thank you for your patience and waiting an additional week for this episode. I had a great and very busy birthday and half-term holiday. It was super busy and super hectic. I didn't manage to get on top of my podcast workload, but honestly, is that a surprise to anyone? Anyway, have you had any sustainability wins or fails lately? I've had some of both that are sort of related. So this year, when I've been able to make the dates, I've been volunteering with the sewing crew at the Brighton Repair Cafe. In recent weeks, they've run two events, both of which I was able to be at. One was a special one put on for International Repair Day, and the one last week was their usual first Saturday of the month event. So my win is that I've been helping members of the public and also some of the other Repair Cafe volunteers to keep their clothing and textile items in use and out of landfill for longer. The fail was that I took 2 dead irons with me to the most recent event from what has become an iron graveyard on top of my cupboard. But the electrical repairs guy wasn't able to save either of them. So one of them that I hadn't really had for very long and was pretty expensive, because of the way it was made, he wasn't able to open it up to see what might be wrong. And the other had a fault with the thermostat that can't be fixed. So those are off to small electricals recycling. But obviously, even if some of the electrical parts can be salvaged and recycled, there's a lot of plastic that won't be. So, basically. I have a backup iron that I got in a charity shop ages ago, but the steam function on that doesn't work, which is super annoying when I'm trying to iron like cotton work shirts and not being able to steam parts of sewing projects. So if anyone knows of an iron, or a brand of iron at least, that are actually repairable and reliable, please do let me know, because I'm looking to invest in a new one again. But let's be cheered up by somebody else's win, which is also an awesome sounding event that some of you might have attended. So a listener called Hannah, who lives in Auckland, New Zealand, heard one of the episodes that I'd made on fabric swaps and was inspired to organise one of her own locally back in May. Apparently that went really well and had about 100 people attending, so major congrats, Hannah. Well, Hannah let me know that event caught the eye of their local community development group, who are funded by the council, and they asked if they could partner with Hannah in some way. So Hannah said that they wanted to do another swap, but bigger and with workshops and demonstrations alongside to make it more of a festival. So that's what they did on Saturday just gone. It was called Threadfest, and Hannah organised local crafty people to run workshops on sewing gift bags, upcycling t-shirts into rag rugs, and making no-sew fabric bunting, and the art of creative invisible mending. They also organised local crochet, knitting, embroidery and quilting groups to come along and demonstrate their crafts and have chats with people who are interested to learn more. Hannah, that is all absolutely incredible. I'm so impressed by that. So let's all be inspired by Hannah. And even if we don't want to organise a whole big thing, let's see if there's some fabric swapping opportunities that are either near you, or even you could organise on your own small scale, perhaps between some sewing pals or via your local sewing or quilting group perhaps. Well, it's been a great couple of weeks for the Check Your Thread Patreon. We have welcomed 5 new patrons into the community. So thanks to Aoife, Patricia, Jane, Maggie and Kim for signing up over the last 2 weeks. And huge thanks to existing member Fran for upping the amount of their support. We also had a couple of wonderful mending meetups that took place via Zoom, and we had a fun sew together session, which I was trialing. So those are like the mending meetups via Zoom, but attendees are welcome to work on any sewing project that they fancy. It's not focused on mending in particular. I've also scheduled an in real life fabric coffee and lunch meetup, and that's going to take place later this month in Walthamstow in East London. And there's talk of some Check Your Thread patrons arranging an in real life meetup in Minnesota soon also. So the Check Your Thread Patreon is really popping these days. If you'd like to be part of the community, please head to patreon.com/checkyourthread to see some of what's going down there and to sign up for any amount that makes sense to you. The link to the Patreon is also in the episode description and the show notes. So let's get cracking with this week's episode. So, as I said at the top, this is a first. We've discussed many sewing-related books in this podcast, but never a novel. So this is breaking new ground. If you enjoyed the quilt frame episode, I think this is going to be totally your jam. Kat Camfield once again did an incredible job of leading this conversation and asking things I would never have thought to ask myself. So, in short, it's a great conversation about an awesome sounding book about a fascinating topic. Do hit up the show notes. There's a link to the silent movie that Natalie talks about, along with other relevant links to Natalie and her work and such. So, until next week, when we're returning to the topic of small sewing businesses, take care of yourselves, your loved ones, and your community. Find your local repair cafe if you haven't already, and have a think if there's anything that you need to get fixed that you can't attempt yourself. And enjoy.
Here we are. Okay, Natalie, can you say something just to say hi? It's me.
How do people do this? Okay, so hi, this is Natalie Fergie, and I'm speaking to you from just outside Edinburgh in Scotland.
Great. And this is Catherine speaking now, and I'm recording in Victoria, which is the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people here on Turtle Island. And now we can start our actual interview.
Okay.
Thanks for joining me today, Natalie. Can you share who you are, where you are, and what fills your days?
Right, okay, so my name's Natalie Fergie, and I live on the outskirts of Edinburgh, which of course is Scotland's capital city. And what do I do to fill my days? I do a bit of sewing, I do a bit of knitting, not much in the summer, that's really a winter activity. I'm a very bad gardener, and I read quite a lot of books.
And you write quite a lot of books too.
That's true, yes, I write books as well. Yes.
You have published 2 books, both of which I have read and enjoyed. Your older book is called The Sewing Machine, and that's the one we're going to focus more on today. But recently, you also published 25 Library Terrace, which is also a lovely book, which I enjoyed. Congratulations on your second book being published. For listeners who haven't read The Sewing Machine, could you give us a bit of a plot summary, please?
So my novel, The Sewing Machine, which came out in 2017, is set in Edinburgh, in the east of Scotland, and in Clydebank, which is on the River Clyde on the west of Scotland. In 1911, there was a huge strike at the Singer factory, Singer Sewing Machines, and things happened as a result of the strike. And my novel follows 2 families. It follows the family of one of the strikers, and it follows the family of a woman who was the owner of one of the sewing machines that the striker helped to make. And gradually the 2 stories become interconnected and they kind of zigzag across each other. It's a nice sewing analogy there, actually. They do that. And so you've got this family in Edinburgh and you've got the family from Clydebank who moved to Edinburgh. And the story kind of comes together with these 2 families not coming completely together until the end of the book.
Got it. Yeah, I love how all the sewing analogies come out when we're talking about all kinds of things, right? Or, textile arts, knitting together and all that. So one thing that's I found really interesting is that both of your novels are feature or focus on or are rooted in physical objects. So your first book, The Sewing Machine, is focused on sewing machines and through time. And your second novel is focused on a physical location, one house at 25 Library Terrace. I'm just curious, what made you decide to choose the sewing machine as the object that you focused your first novel on?
It was a complete accident. I wasn't intending to write a book at all. I had a treadle sewing machine, and in the drawer of a vibrating shuttle machine, so the machines that use the long bobbins, not the little round bobbins that we're very familiar with today. And in the drawer of the treadle sewing machine, there was a little catalogue from 1929, so more than 30 years after the production of the first of the treadle sewing machine. And I remember thinking, well, why would anybody want a new sewing machine? This one works perfectly well, because it did. I made patchwork quilts on it. I made clothes on it, on this more than 100-year-old machine. And then I thought, Natalie, just get over yourself. Of course somebody would want a new sewing machine after 30 years. I would want a new sewing machine after 30 years. Just behave yourself. And I started doing research into Singer and Clydebank, and almost by accident, with Mr. Google, I came across information about the strike at the Singer factory in 1911. So that was kind of the beginning of this story. And then I was going through the pages of this little catalogue, and I thought, I've got one of those, and I've got one of those, and oh, that looks interesting, and I haven't got one of those. I think I need another sewing machine. So I decided that the one I wanted was a 99K, which was first made coincidentally in 1911, around the time of the strike. And the book kind of came out of me owning this hand crank 1911 sewing machine. Well, mine is actually from 1920s, but a machine that was first designed to be produced in 1911. And the story came out of that.
Oh, that's so fascinating. It's like your love of sewing led to a sewing machine, which led to more sewing machines, which led to researching the history. That's great. So, could you paint us a picture of what the would have been like to work at the Singer Sewing Machine Factory in Clydebank in 1911? One of the things I was absolutely shocked to learn was just how many people worked there at around the time of the strike. Wasn't it over 10,000 people or something like that?
I think the number's about 12,000 people. I'm not completely sure, but I think the number is about 12,000 people, or possibly a few more. There were a lot of women who worked in the factory, as well as men. It wasn't just engineers, the women were working in all the different departments as well. I imagine that it would have been a pretty noisy place. You've got machinery, people would not have had earbuds and ear defenders and all these sort of things. So I would imagine it was pretty noisy. Women were but women were paid a lot less than men in 1911. And the factory was divided into what I'm told and have read were called flats. So you had the needle flat, which made the needles. You had the testing flat, which tested the sewing machines. You had the polishing flat, and the polishing flat was where women, and it was women, were responsible for the finishing of the woodwork. So just literally polishing the wood and making sure that the finished product looked good when it went out to the shops. That's pretty much how it was. Masses and masses of people, and all the Singer factories around the world. The one in Russia, the ones in America, and I think there was one in South America as well. All had a big clock tower, so there was no excuse for being late for work. There was a big tower that you could see from all around Clydebank, and that was you knew what your starting time was, and you had to be through the gates and locked in by the time you were supposed to be there.
Yeah, it sounds like it was quite a strict place to work. There wasn't a lot of time to just relax, and you were on the clock, and yeah, productivity was really focused on it. I think it was you that I learned from about the film that was made in, I think it's the early 30s. I know it's a bit later than when your book is set, but that fantastic silent movie, it's like over an hour long, that shows the whole process of making the machines, and it just gives you a sense of the scale and the way the steps were broken down into these tiny little steps for making these machines. And I imagine in 1911 it was fairly similar to that.
The film, if anybody wants to look at it, is on the National Library for Scotland website, and I think it's called The Birth of a Sewing Machine or something very like that. It's a black and white silent movie, and it follows the making of a sewing machine literally from the arrival on the ships of the pig iron that was brought into the country physically to make the metal housing for the sewing machines, right through to the machines being finished their polishing process and being shipped out to shops, and all the individual stages in between. It's a fascinating film.
Yeah.
No health and safety. It's
No, I remember watching these poor women. I think they were polishing machines and then they were hanging them on hooks above their head. And it's like if they missed the hook, that was coming down on their heads. So I guess the working conditions weren't always the best. And it sounds like that was partly what led to the strike that you set your novel in. That, from what I remember, there was a polishing department at that factory that had 15 women in it, I think. You could probably tell the story better than me. But I think what it was, 3 women's positions were cut and the rest of the workers were expected to take on their work. Is that right?
pretty much. So what happened was that the company, Singer, brought in what they called scientific management, which was time and motion, what we would call time and motion studies. They looked at the factory and they tried to see where they could, shave a few seconds or a few minutes of a process in order to speed up the manufacture of the sewing machines. And one of the things they did in their wisdom was that they decided that the polishing department, which had 15 women in it, that they could reduce the staffing levels in that department. Of the 15 women, 12 were polishers and 3 were defect repairers. And the defect repairers would have been doing much more what you might call particular work. They would have been the ones who were polishing out the scratches, who were perhaps doing a little bit of French polishing on a bit of nicked a timber with a chunk missing or something like that, and they would have been doing all that fine work. And of course, that work took longer than just basic polishing. So by moving 3 women, that work was left to be done by the 12 who remain. And those women were paid piece rate. So they were paid per machine or per cabinet. And of course, their work rate went down. So therefore, their wages went down. And that was the beginning of the strike. And what was remarkable really was that of these 15 women, 12,000 people came out on strike in support of these just 15. It must have been felt like kind of the thin end of the wedge. If we don't do something now, they'll come in and they'll do other stuff in this company. But 12,000 people came out on strike in support of just 15. And women, not 15 men, 15 women, which is truly remarkable.
Yeah, it is. It also makes me wonder what the conditions were like in the other departments at that time. I'm guessing that Singer was taking that "we must be as efficient as possible" motto to heart, and probably conditions in the other departments weren't that great either.
I can't be sure about that. I don't know that. I'm not sure that anybody really knows. I only know this bit of the story.
Yeah.
I do know that there were 4 big Singer factories. Clydebank was one, and there were 3 in North America. And I do know that the factory managers in North America were sending telegrams to the factory manager in Clydebank, basically saying, "Get this sorted. We do not want your strike coming over to North America. Get this sorted out. You have to fix this." The strike lasted about 3 weeks, just over 3 weeks, and he did get it sorted. Not in the best way, but he did get it sorted. But there was a lot of worry in the company that this industrial action, what we now would call industrial action, would spread across the pond.
Yeah. How difficult was it for you to find the historical information that you used as the basis of your book? What kind of sources did you find to get information about what it was like to live there at the time, what it was like at the factory?
So I used various things actually, but the big ones were to look in the British Newspaper Archive, which is a subscriber website that covers newspapers from as early as newspapers existed until the present day. I have a subscription to it, and you can go and look up all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff there. And there were reports of marches during the strike and reports of the strike itself in the Glasgow newspapers, and I think in the Dundee press as well. And the other, apart from the obvious one, which is the internet and image searching for things on the internet, the other was to go to Clydebank Library, and in the basement of Clydebank Library is the Singer collection. So the Singer collection is an archive of all sorts of stuff: photographs, letters, the company magazine. As years went on, the company became much more kind of paternalistic, looking after its workers much better. And there was a weekly magazine, and there was all this sort of paper ephemera that you could look at. And that was really interesting. And the other thing that they had on display was they had the hire purchase agreements. So a little card that says, you are now the owner of this sewing machine, and you need to pay so much a week in order to pay up the sewing machine if it's hire purchase. Singer were very innovative. They were one of the first companies to offer hire purchase agreements to women without needing a co-signature from a man. And they didn't need the woman to be married. So a single woman could go into a shop and take on a hire purchase agreement to take her sewing machine home. And that was, when you think, that's very unusual, 1920s, 1930s, that's really was very forward thinking at the time.
That was very clever of them too, right? I mean, it assisted them to sell more machines, but it also made a difference in a lot of women's lives, I would imagine. I think that you also touched on that a little bit in your book as well.
You could take home the sewing machine on the day, and if you didn't like it, you could take it back within a month. And they would give you the money back, and they would take the sewing machine back, no questions asked. I don't know how many women actually ever did take their sewing machines back.
Yeah.
Because of course, if you've never had a machine and then you suddenly got a machine, you could imagine this is like freedom. You can make all sorts of stuff with a sewing machine. So yes, another way that they were very innovative in how they sold their machines. And the library has all this stuff, but it also has the strike ballot cards, or a couple of the strike ballot cards that were sent out because there was a company-wide ballot about whether or not everybody was going to go back to work, and they've got a few of those as well, which is very interesting and quite touching, really, to see these ballot cards sitting in a glass case. And the staff at the Clydebank Library were fabulous, so they were really helpful as well.
Oh, I love that there are so many details like that, like the strike ballot card that was used by the company to essentially, I mean, they were a bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Manipulative, but they were trying to get the workers back to work. And I just love that you included all these little details in your novel that are based in the actual history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The description that I give in the novel at the beginning of the testing flat of the area that the machines were tested in is taken from an image that I found in Clydebank Library, and it's also available online, of a long room and tables of 6 to 8 women arranged along the length of this room, tall windows on the left-hand side with kind of hopper windows at the top, to let fresh air in. And between each window, there were coats hung up on the wall in each window. And on the right-hand side, there were kind of banks of sewing machines that were either about to be tested or had just been tested. And the description that I have in the book is absolutely taken from that photograph.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, I guess turning a bit more back into your book, in one of the timelines of your book set in 1954, Kathleen and Connie, two of the characters, Kathleen's daughter is Connie, make some garments out of Connie's father's clothing, which I found quite interesting because we're talking about reuse of garments these days. Also, in another section of your book, you have a character named Fred who upcycles some of his grandfather's clothes to make them fit him. And I was just curious, what made you want to include sections on quote unquote upcycling in your book?
I think I didn't really intend it. I mean, this book was written around 2000, about 10 years ago now, although it takes some time for it to move from, first word on the page to publication in a shop. It takes a while for that to happen. I didn't really set out for it to be a book about upcycling, but you're quite right. Now it's quite relevant, more relevant, because we're all talking about it, and we're all talking about how we can make our clothes last longer and do repairs and so on and so forth. I wanted the story of what was sewn by this little machine, because it's just a little, very plain little 99p hand crank. It wasn't a fancy machine. It wasn't one in a big cabinet or any drawers and engraving and marquetry on the cabinet as some of the cabinets were. It was the most basic sewing machine that you could get from Singer. It was almost the cheapest one in the catalogue. Singer sold their sewing machines in a bit like we buy cars now. So you would go to the Singer shop and they would sell you a a basic sewing machine, and then they'd say, and would you like this to come in a rather nicer cabinet, madam? And
Upselling.
exactly, definitely upselling. Oh, and right, okay, and that sounds good. Well, we have cabinets with 3 drawers, but we also have them with 5 and 7. Those we like, and actually, the one with 7 cabinets, we do have one that has doors on the front, so it looked like a piece of parlour furniture, if you would like that. In much the same way as we go now to buy a car, and they say, would you like metallic paint, and would you like broadband and Bluetooth on your screen on the car, and do you know what I mean? And extra
Yeah.
all this sort of stuff. So that was part of the story, but the idea of what was sewn on the machine being part of the story came from something that happened a bit earlier, which was that when I got myself a 99K and brought it home, I wanted to use it. I bought it secondhand from somebody in Clydebank, bizarrely, and it was about 5th hand or something. It wasn't
Oh,
one of
wow.
these machines with an original bill of sale and a family history attached to it. It was just a little basic sewing machine, and brought it home because I wanted to use it. I needed to take the thread off the bobbins because I had no idea how long it had been there. And old thread is quite snappy, and it disintegrates, or it's already whatever. And so I took the thread off these bobbins, and the first bobbin was black thread,
Yeah.
and the second bobbin was green, every green you can imagine, from really quite bright greens through to school uniform and army great coats and gardening type stuff. So there were all these greens, and the third bobbin was an absolute explosion in a paint factory. It was bright pink and peacock purple and egg yolk yellow and just every possible mad colour you could put on a single bobbin. And there were only these 3 bobbins. So I reeled all the thread off these bobbins and dumped it on the table in front of me so that I could wind a new bobbin and experiment with this sewing machine. And I went to scoop these threads up. And as I did it, initially I thought, I'll just throw these away. And as I scooped them up in my hands, I thought, no, wait a minute here. I'm holding a bit of history here. I'm holding somebody's gardening trousers. I'm holding somebody's first day at school, or a first date. I'm holding a christening gown. I'm holding a wedding dress. I'm holding a special skirt being worn to an interview. And that was the moment, more than anything else, that I thought, there's a story here. And that's why at the end of the chapters, at least initially, but it gradually throughout the book, it's why at the end of end of each chapter it says what's been sewn in that chapter, what's been sewn and who by and who it was for. And when you read the book, that's it's almost like an extra story. If you read what's at the end of the chapters, there are some things at the end of the chapters that are really quite big clues that you don't realize until later, that something important has happened earlier, and it's just a few words at the end of a chapter. So that's part of why there's the upcycling, if you like, and the record keeping is so important within the book.
Yeah, it is amazing when you think about that clothing is something we need every day. Clothing used to be primarily sewn by the women in the home. So then, yeah, if someone had a sewing machine for 30, 40 years, what garments would have been sewn on there? A woman might have been sewing for her children. Her children would grow and grow up and move out. And yeah, it's like a touchstone almost throughout someone's life, really.
What has been interesting is the number of people, and I'm talking 3-figure numbers here, of people who have got in touch with me after reading the book and said, I've just started a book.
Oh, lovely.
I made a book and I've just started a book, and they've sent me photographs of their pages with, a little tiny scrap of fabric and a line of stitching on the paper, and notes about the pattern or how many meters of fabric they've needed and who it was for. And there are a significant number now of people with a little notebook of everything they've sewn since they read the book. And that is just, I don't know, it just kind of gets me. Every time I get an email, I think, wow, that is just amazing. But
Yeah, because
a number of people have done it, and I'm not talking half a dozen here. I'm talking a significant number, which is just incredible to me.
yeah, that's amazing. For those who haven't read your novel, people, I guess, should know that that was something that was featured in your novel. That one person who owns a machine does keep a record of every single thing she's sewn on the machine, just like Natalie was just describing. It's she makes a handmade little book, and then she puts a little bit of her fabric swatch and some of her stitching, and then talks about what the garment is. And what a beautiful, it's almost like you started a little movement. It would be so beautiful to have those on your Instagram or something, Natalie. It would be really fun to see. People should hashtag it, and then we could see what people have done. I personally would find that fascinating, just to see how people have taken that idea and made it their own.
If anybody, I can't do it now because it's with the ones that I've already been sent, because I wouldn't know how to get in touch with all these people now. But if anybody would like to start a little notebook and send me a picture of it and would like it or to be on Instagram, or wouldn't mind if I put an Instagram, I could absolutely do that. It's just such a simple thing to do, and it's a personal record, it's a family record, it's an event record of, you know, an interview for a job, or a special dress made for something, or just a repair. We're all upcycling and repairing our clothes. It could be a repair to a pair of jeans or a new zip in something. And it's part of a record of life, isn't it?
Yeah,
Of the
exactly.
that we've done, not just of the physical object, but of the occasions around and the decisions that we make.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I imagine too, like I guess I've only really been sewing as an adult, maybe for the last 5 or 6 years. My list wouldn't be that long. But if you've made something and 20 years have passed, it would be really fun to go back and be like, oh yeah, I made that dress. It was what was happening at that time in my life. I was making it for that occasion. Right. Like that's pretty neat. And also a neat document to pass on to future generations as well. Right.
Yeah, I'm sitting here nodding my head. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, another fun thing that I found in the sewing machine I really enjoyed was the fact that sewing machines get used in, well, two ways in a contemporary context. You have Fred, one of the characters in the contemporary setting, who learns to sew using his great grandmother's hand crank sewing machine. And then a woman named Ellen who takes discarded machines apart and makes them into works of art. So Fred's using the sewing machine in a traditional, as it was intended kind of way, and Ellen's repurposing them to turn them into something else. I was curious why you decided to have each character use those sewing machines in such vastly different ways. Well, they're both sort of honoring the history of it, but yeah, could you just talk a little bit more about that?
So I wanted there to be a difference between the way that Fred saw his sewing machine, because there's a family connection. All right, he trips over it a few times, and
He's using it as
he's using it as
a door stop, which made me laugh so hard.
And he's not seeing it as a sewing machine to be used. He would have remembered it being used as a child, but he's not seeing it as an object that would is of any importance. And I wanted him to gradually come to the realization that this isn't just a lump of metal and wood, that there's a purpose to it and there's a connection to the past. Whereas for Ellen, she's coming at it from a different perspective. Ellen isn't a dressmaker. She isn't somebody who sews. She isn't somebody who is going to look at this sewing machine and think, oh, that's fascinating. I wonder how I make a dress, right? Ellen is coming at it from quite a different, more mechanical perspective. And also there are other things within her family that mean that she is not romantic about the idea of an old sewing machine. For Ellen, the old sewing machines are functional objects. They are not something to be romantic about. Whereas for Fred, there is an emotional connection, which isn't there at the beginning, but which develops. And that was a contrast that I really was very keen to have between the two characters.
I love that you set those characters up in those ways, and I also love that Fred is having a non-traditional gendered role in terms of how he decides to actually use the sewing machine. He ends up learning to sew. And I found that really refreshing that you did that swap, that you didn't go for it being a woman who was using her grandmother's machine and then it was a man who was making this functional art. I love that you did that switch because it's fresher and it's relevant, and we do see more men taking up sewing now. And I thought, yeah, I really loved that part of the book.
10 years ago, men taking up sewing, I think, was probably happening, but not in the way that it's talked about now on Instagram, on the Great British Sewing Bee, and on stuff like that. It was a more unusual angle to come at it.
Yeah, I love that you included that. So speaking, I guess, of the romanticization of sewing machines, and I have to say I am guilty of that myself. And I think maybe you are a little bit too. I know we both have collections of beautiful old vintage machines that we do use. They're not just pieces of art. But one of the things I loved in both of your books is that I felt like you really treated these older objects. So whether it was an older sewing machine or the house in 25 Library Terrace, as well as Fred's grandfather's flat and his grandfather's personal belongings and his garden plot, and then Connie's father's clothing as well, with a lot of tenderness. And at one point in the modern setting, the 2016 setting of the sewing machine, a character says about sewing machines, I really don't get the whole vintage thing. Personally, I'd buy a new one. So I was just curious if you could talk a little bit about your own appreciation for older objects comes from, because I'm guessing with the two books, connecting with old objects like that, it must resonate with you.
So yes, I do appreciate and enjoy, and to some extent collect older things. My favourite fountain pen, for example, is a Parker 51, which I found behind a bus stop about 40 years ago, and it has a fabulous nib on it. And I don't use anything else. It's my favourite pen. There are other things, other old things that I have. I have one of my grandmother's soup ladles, for example, which is not a thing of beauty. It's not solid silver or anything like that, but I know that she would have used it, and I use it now. I have sewing machines. I don't use all of them, but I have some vintage sewing machines, and the ones I have all work. I could use them if I wanted to, and I do still use the hand, particularly the hand crank. I still use. I'm not romantic about it. I don't want a house full of objects to look at. I want to be able to use the things that I have. I'm not like an art collector. I'm not a curator of things like that. The things that I have, I want to use. Because you could collect forever. You could just end up with this enormous collection of stuff, and then you don't use any of it. I would rather have things that I use properly. My favorite sewing machine is actually not the 99K, although I very much love my 99K. The machine I use most is a featherweight 222K, which is the free arm featherweight.
Yeah.
Take that to guild meetings, and I recently made a pair of trousers on it, and it's the machine. It's actually sitting on my desk about 6 feet away from where I'm sitting now, and it's the machine I go to turn up a hem on something or make something simple. It doesn't zigzag. It won't. It's just a little straight stitch machine. But for what I need as an instant, I'll just sew that. That's the one I go to. So I want stuff that I can use, not stuff that I can look at, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It's like you appreciate the functionality of it. It has the history that's connected to it, but you do also want it to be useful.
The machines are scratched. They've got marks. The gold edges, are the decals are wearing off. I don't mind. I'm more interested in using it than I am in looking at it.
Yeah, I feel very similarly about my featherweight. If you ever look at my sewing station at home, I've always got my my featherweight set up, and my overlocker, my serger, is next to it. But if I'm just doing some straight stitching, I'm always going back to my featherweight. It's simple, it's easy to clean, it does a beautiful straight stitch. It only does a straight stitch, and I absolutely love it. I often, when I see contemporary machines being advertised for sale and they say, oh, it's got 40 stitches, I'm like, you don't need 40 stitches. Like realistically, I would probably end up using 6 out of those 40 stitches. And I have I also have a faff that is from 1982 that has plenty of stitches on it. I don't know how you feel about it, but I just love the simplicity. It does one thing and it does it very well. And so that's one of the things I love about my featherweight.
My first, we're digressing now into sewing machines, but
That's
my,
okay.
my first decent sewing machine, if you like, apart from a very basic New Home that was a beast, an absolute beast, was a faff. I bought it must have been about 1983 or 1984. It was a Tiptronic 1029, and it had a feature on it. It used clear plastic bobbins.
Oh,
And
yes.
the little red light, and when the red light underneath could see through the bobbin, you had about a meter left of thread on your bobbin, and a little light flashed at you. And it was the best thing. It saved my bacon so many times. Have I got enough ruche? Have I got enough thread left to do another buttonhole? Or have I got enough thread to just finish off this hem? And you would think, yep, or no. Fantastic, and it was the best. It was the best. I have another faff now.
Brilliant.
That was the best machine. Faff Tiptronic 1029. I want one.
It's too bad that I don't know, that technology doesn't seem to have been carried on. I don't know if it's even used now, but how many times do sewists complain about playing bobbin chicken with their thread?
Like yarn chicken, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Bobbin chicken is yarn chicken is.
So just speaking a little bit more about your sewing machine collection, I did read on your website that you had, I don't know if you still have, but you had 11 sewing machines that were all previously owned by someone else. I know you've talked a bit now about why you like to collect the older machines, but tell me about your machines. What machines do you have? How many machines do you have now, and what are they?
So at the moment, I've got, this is going to sound very braggy. It's not meant to be braggy. I've got my 222K. I've got a black 221, which works. I've got a white 221, and there's something wrong with the motor, so I need to get that one fixed. I've got my 99K, which I use, not often, but I do use it. I've got a 1919 Frista Rossmann hand crank, which I found in a skip. In North America, you would say found in a dumpster. And it was outside a house, and I found it must have been about 1981, something like that. And somebody was clearing the house for renovations, and they had just emptied all the house contents into this skip, and it was lying on the top of the skip. And I said to the workman, who would I speak to about taking this, or can I buy it? And I had no idea what was inside it. It was a closed case. I had no idea what was actually inside, other than that it was an old sewing machine. And he said, no, take it, just take it, it'll be fine. So I took it and I brought it home, and I had to find a key that would fit the case because there was no key with it. So I have no idea how I did that, because that was pre-internet, that literally, I don't know. I have no idea how I did it, but anyway. And it's a hand crank, it's a vibrating shuttle, it's a Frista Rossmann, which was a German machine, and it was 1919, if you look at the date. And I think that must be quite unusual to find a 1919 German machine in Scotland, post-World War One.
It would have been interesting to find out how that machine ended up in Scotland.
I have no idea. And on the front, there's marquetry, and it's along the front of the machine it's like a measuring tape. Measured in 1/4 inches along the front, so you could measure your fabric, your 2 inches, your 3 inches, or whatever, along the front edge of the sewing machine in marquetry.
That's handy.
And it's a lovely little machine. Little machine. And apart from that, what else have I got? I've got a Lotus 66 treadle, and the 66 is like the big sister of the 99K. It's exactly the same engineering, it's just 25% bigger, or a third bigger, maybe even, and it's just a bigger machine. And that's a treadle, and that one is still running, and I have used it.
That's lovely. I also have a hand crank. I can't remember the model number off the top of my head, but there's something so lovely about sewing without a motor noise. I just find it really therapeutic. It slows me down. You've got really good control. And I find it so meditative. I love using my hand crank.
I also like if I'm in a charity shop or something, and their hand cranks turn up in charity shops, you can look up how old a machine is from the number on the machine.
Yes.
On the front of the machine, there's a kind of brass like a flattened oval, and there's a number. If it's a singer, there's a number stamped into that metal. And you can go to the International Sewing Machine Collectors Society, ISMAX, I think it is, and there is a table of singer dating. And you can look up the number. You have to make sure that you've got the correct letter, but also the correct number of numbers, because some of them are 6 numbers, some of them are 7, some of them are 8. And it will tell you the date it was made and also the model. So if you're not sure of the model, but you've got the serial number, it will identify the model for you as well. And I find that really interesting, because you can go in and you can look and you think, oh, okay, so that one was made in 1936. So what was happening in the world in 1936? Or that was 1952 or 1921. Do you know what I mean? And you can think back, so what were the fashions then? What was going on in the world when this machine was brand new? And I'm not sure. I mean, there are probably other things in the world that you can do that with, but the sewing machine connection, the ease with which you can just go and place that machine in a historical context of when it was first bought, I think is unique, or almost unique.
Yeah, I think that that registry is such a gift. And the other thing that I find interesting about it, especially, I guess, a couple of years ago when I first learned of it, was looking at the sheer number of machines. So you might be like, oh, okay, here's my serial number. It's in this range. Oh, that year they produced 1 million machines out of this one factory. Like, it's a bit mind-blowing, right? You know?
That was just like in the Clydebank factory. It also lists all the North American factories and, around the world. And that's just one company. That's just Singer. These things, phenomenon, an absolute phenomenon, But I'm with you. I love the sound of the hand crank. It's a very restful sound. And I can imagine there would have been a lot of children over the years who've gone to sleep to the sound of a sewing machine in the background. Almost like a soothing familiarity in the house of hearing the clicking and the noise of the sewing machine as mom, and it probably was mom, was doing sewing in the evening.
Oh, that's a beautiful image, Natalie, you've just put in my head, and now I'm feeling more peaceful. I never even considered that. But yeah, it would be it is a sort of a smooth, repetitive, gentle noise, a little bit like how they use dishwashers, I think, these days to try to help babies get soothed to sleep.
Yeah.
Maybe the sewing machine was the older equivalent. Do you have a favorite of all your sewing machines?
Probably the featherweight, because it's the one I use the most.
Yeah.
And it's my go-to because sewing is basically straight lines. I mean, we can overlock edges and we can zigzag buttonholes and stuff like that, but the vast majority of sewing is straight lines. Even a curve is made up of lots of individual straight lines.
That's true.
And a machine that will do a really good straight seam is so much better than a machine that will sew you a row of little ducks.
Not to disparage the little ducks. I'm sure they're delightful too sometimes. But not exactly your basic everyday stitch.
I would take a good straight stitch over a row of little ducks any day.
Me too. And it's funny, like I found with the older machines, I find that their straight stitches are nicer. The more modern machines I've used, I don't know why, but they always seem to have a slight angle on them. They're just not as pretty. So I really love those older machines for that too. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I've really enjoyed talking to you about, the inspiration for your book, about your love of the vintage machines, and you've given me some really beautiful images that I'm left thinking about. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
No, you're very welcome. I'm now also developing a collection of old fabric as well. So my upcycling, if you like, has moved on a bit from sewing machines to looking for old fabric to turn into other things as well. So there's another angle to the
Ooh, That's fun. Thanks very much.
You're welcome. It was lovely to chat. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing Zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!